Welcome back. I hope that your attempt at celebrating your knowledge for chapter 1 went well. And here we go with the overview for chapter 2. So chapter 2 provided an overview of typical development and discusses factors that affect development. In order for change to constitute development, 3 criteria must be met. 1, change must be orderly and met in a step-to-step fashion so that a foundation is built. It must be consistent, though there will inevitably be some sensitive or critical periods where progress is more affected by external conditions. And 3, it must allow the individual to holistically function at a higher level. Development can either be quantitative or qualitative, but it's generally easier to track quantitative changes because there's clearer markers that we can usually mark off on those observations that we're doing. To understand development, one must first bridge the notions of hereditary and environment. The 18th century French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau proposed that a child's development and nature were ultimately decided by the natural characteristics given to him by his or her parents. One of the problems with that is that it put all the onus on the parents and how they raise the kid. And so that could be kind of stressful for parents. Conversely, 17th century British philosopher Jean Locke believed that the child was born a tabula rasa, or a blank slate, and that his or her environment determined perspective. He believed that if a child was thought of as a flower, that if the garden is tended to, making sure that there's enough light and water and plant food, that it would grow well on its own. And that's what he thought children would thrive in, with just some assistance. Ultimately, there is the decision that that a combination of hereditary and environment, and that's widely accepted, that both of those determine a child's growth and development. A contemporary approach, behavior genetics, seeks to bridge the gap in understanding by focusing instead on how genetics predisposition and how those are expressed in behavior. The time from conception to birth constitutes the prenatal period and is divided into 3 stages. The germinal stage is first, and it lasts about 2 weeks. During this time, mitosis rapidly develops after the sperm and the egg union happens and turns into a blastocyst, and then it's later called an embryonic disc. From that's where the baby will develop. The second stage is the embryonic stage, and during that, the disc turns into the embryo, which resembles a tiny human, if not a little alien-like, if you will. Nearly all major birth defects occurred during this period or slightly after. The third and final period is known as the fetal stage, which begins with the development of the first bone cell around 8 or 9 weeks and lasts through birth. The embryo is now a fetus. And as an aside, your bones are not completely hardened until you're about 18 years old. Just a little fun fact there for you. The neonatal period is perhaps the most fragile moment of a lifetime. The primary factors that affect the outcome of a child's first 4 weeks are the baby's size, how well the mom ate and what her nutrition was like, and overall health. For example, prematurity and or low weight may be present. These terms are not mutually exclusive, and I'll go on to explain that a little bit more. Placental insufficiency and slow growth rates are often to blame when babies are born weighing less than 25 grams, which equates to about 5.5 pounds, which is considered low birth weight. Whereas babies are called premature when they gestate for less than 37 full weeks. 40 weeks is the full term pregnancy. Babies born at 38 weeks are pretty good, but they really like them to go the full term of 40 weeks. Long-term effects vary widely, but generally the further an infant is from the 25,000 grams, 5.5 pound criterion, the greater the problems it experiences. Infancy lasts the life's 4th week through the 2nd year, and it's marked by extreme physical and developmental growth. Weight, length, and head circumference are really the major markers for physical development, while myelinization stands for the marker for overall development. Life's 2nd and 3rd years are known as the toddler years. Remember, we want to call those the positive twos. the terrific twos instead of the other twos, as sometimes they're referred to. Although the child experiences a slowing of physical development, he or she maintains a more rapid growth rate than any other point except for adolescence. At age 2, they have a full set of baby teeth and the capacity to name objects, places, people, and by age 3, they progress to full-on sentences. The sentences that a 3-year-old starts with are pretty short, but with a 2-year-old, they're pretty much want cookie. The 3-year-old, I want a cookie, and we progress from there. In broad terms, a greater coordination between thought, language, movement, and emotions demarcates toddlerhood. Preschool is the period that follows that, and it's a time of refinement in growth patterns. So they have all of this growth, and now they're just really getting everything a little bit more fine-tuned as they are developing. From conception through the preschool years, there's a variety of factors that can affect the natural trajectory of development. Grave danger exists in the form of maternal illness during pregnancy, if she has a stressful delivery, and especially if there's child abuse and neglect present. As a rule, the more advanced the mother's age, the greater chance for negative outcomes, but the same is true for teenagers. Young parents do have some possibilities for negative outcomes also. Furthermore, priority greatly affects the outcomes of other births. So the first birth is generally the greater risk because all the maternal systems involved in pregnancy and delivery have yet to be tested, whereas extremely high priority has been linked to stillbirths and Down syndrome. So the older a mom gets, the greater chances that those things may occur. Like older mothers, older fathers can carry the added risk of underdeveloped sperm that could have been long exposed to environmental hazards and teratogens, thus negatively altering genes or chromosomes. Some people think, oh, dad's going to have babies, for a long time, and there's no problem. But really, there can be things that have affected their sperm. Additionally, just as an aside, it has been found that young fathers who were heavy drinkers also can cause changes in their sperm and the chromosomes, and therefore cause problems with the developing baby also. Additionally, maternal nutrition is a critical component of prenatal care. When the mother receives proper nutrients and her baby can thrive during pregnancy and after birth, as proper weight gain is associated with an increase in birth weight. Though it's difficult to pinpoint the exact effects, teratogens exist as external factors that cause later structural or functional disabilities. With any substance, the timing, dosage, and frequency of the exposure and use determine the severity of the effects on the child. Alcohol stands as the leading cause of birth defects and developmental disabilities in the United States. It can lead to fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, FASD, and though moderate to high levels of alcohol consumption early in pregnancy cause the most severe problems, a single instance of binge drinking can also be more detrimental than prolonged drinking. Similarly, fetal tobacco syndrome, also referred to as FTS, is characterized by mothers who smoke 5 or more cigarettes per day, have no maternal history of hypertension in pregnancy, have babies with fetal growth retardation at term, and manifest no other causes for their baby's intrauterine retardation. This could be due to the nicotine's vasoconstrictive properties. Like alcohol and tobacco, babies with exposure to other substances such as heroin, marijuana, or cocaine may potentially experience significant setbacks physically and developmentally. So I want to talk about a couple of those things. We all know about drinking and the hazards of that. I believe that tobacco has really come more out about what we're seeing, and we are seeing developmental delays with those kids. A lot of times that doesn't show up until they're school age, so tying that back to the mom smoking can be hard. With vaping, there's been so much in the news about vaping lately that looking into that a little bit, somebody told me that one cartridge is like smoking an entire pack of cigarettes, and that can only have even more significant problems for a developing baby. Remember, secondhand smoke can be as bad, and there's some discussion about third-hand smoke, so it's on your clothing and you hold the baby next to it, that can cause some developmental lung delays, etc. Also, marijuana. It's legal in Oregon for people of age to partake, and I have been seeing more instances of people who have been using marijuana to reduce nausea and the discomfort during pregnancy. There has been more studies, since it's a little bit newer. They haven't done a lot of research on it, but they have found that that also is causing not only physical issues, but developmental issues as well. So birth defects can happen for a lot of different reasons. Some of them are environmental. Some are because of the mom's age, or there's other things that can occur during development. Genetics can play a factor, and sometimes birth defects just happen. For example, in my family, there was no history of any kinds of birth defects. And so with the birth of my first child, it took us a while to figure out that he was born with a cleft palate. For those of you who aren't sure what that is, cleft meaning whole or absence, and a palate is the top of your mouth. And so to look at him, you couldn't see anything, but if you looked in the back of his mouth, his uvula was more heart-shaped because it was flapping, and he had a short palate as well as a hole in the back. So that had never happened with anyone we knew in our family, but my husband's genes, my genes got together and created a new anomaly, because that oftentimes is tied to family genetics. Because we had one child with a cleft palate, it did increase our chances of having a second child with a cleft palate. And we won the lottery. Sorry, you got to be positive about stuff. So we had a second child who had a cleft palate also. His was very large. In fact, the plates in his palate never came down and closed and fused together. They stayed open. So he basically had an opening straight up to his sinuses. Both were repaired. Both are good. And you wouldn't know looking at them, and actually their speech patterns and their language were not affected. The older son, no problems whatsoever. The younger son, like I mentioned in my last video, he had some speech things going on, and there were some other health issues that he experienced because of the large cleft that he had. So working with families, it's really important that we don't scare them, but that we know what can happen, and that when families have these things happen to them, that we can be there as a support for them and help them understand, as well as find those areas where we can connect them with community resources as they need. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, I always like to share some personal facts to tie it to what we're talking about. And as you gained information there, you found that I have two kids. They're now 24 and 21, so they're older, but I tell all their baby stories all the time. So thank you for listening, and good luck on your celebration of knowledge for this module.